What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. Every once in a while, Russia briefly remembers that it still pretends to have something resembling civil society. But recently, that memory resurfaced in the most unexpected place possible. A meeting of the Presidential Council for Civil Society and Human Rights. Yes, that council still exists in Russia. Probably the easiest job even for its employees, but anyways. Yes, it still gathers under Vladimir Putin, and yes, most of the time it functions exactly as you would expect in a hyper-personalist authoritarian system. Politely nodding, asking harmless questions, agreeing to everything, and pretending that words still matter. But this time something slipped through the cracks. Film director Alexander Sokurov, one of the few remaining council members not selected for loyalty or aggression, spoke in a language Russia has not heard in years. Especially Putin. And the language was calm, human, rational, not opposition slogans, not anti-war chants, just common sense. And that, apparently, was enough to shock everyone, including Sokurov himself. Because when normal speech suddenly feels subversive, you are no longer dealing with politics, you are dealing with systemic decay. So today, let's unpack what Sokurov actually said, why it mattered, and why the Kremlin's reaction revealed far more than any speech ever could. Surprise, surprise, the Human Rights Council was never a powerful institution. Even before 2022, it was not some fearless watchdog breathing down the Kremlin's neck. It was more like a pressure valve, a symbolic cushion meant to absorb discontent before it boiled over. Well, still, cushions do matter. Protests happened, investigative journalism occasionally broke through, petitions worked once in a while. Sometimes someone caught in the system gears was pulled out before being crushed completely. The Ivan Golunov case is the textbook example in this case. And for a long time, the Human Rights Council was part of this fragile ecosystem. Then came the limitations. In 2017, council members were banned from visiting prisons and detention centers. In 2019, inconvenient figures like Ekaterina Shulman and Pavel Chikov were removed. Leadership was handed to Valery Fadeev, a man whose modern political mission appears to be preemptively justifying rights violations before anyone even complains. By 2022, well, the mask, as you would have guessed it, was completely off. 13 council members cautiously opposed the war, media repression, and the free speech violations. Today, only 5 of them remain. The rest were replaced with pro-war bloggers, propagandists, and people who treat the phrase human rights like a personal insult. This was the backdrop against which Sokurov spoke. Not a protest, not on YouTube, not an exile, but inside the system itself, during a meeting chaired by Putin the Tsar. And that's exactly why it mattered. Because this was not dissent shouting from outside the gates. It was normality walking into the throne room and refusing to whisper. But what exactly did he say during this meeting that quietly outraged Putin? Let's talk about it in our next chapters. One of the most uncomfortable moments came when Sokurov talked about education. Not geopolitics, not NATO, not Ukraine, but just simple education. Universities cutting state-funded places, remaining slots reserved for the children of war veterans, straight-A students pushed aside despite years of preparation. And the question he asked was devastatingly simple. What happens to those kids? Well, this is where the regime panicked internally, because on paper this sounds like an attack on fallen soldiers' families. And that is exactly how it was framed by loyal commentators within minutes. But that framing collapses the moment you think for more than 5 seconds. Russian families are fine with mercenaries receiving millions in sign-up bonuses, but they're far less comfortable sacrificing their children's future to justify a war nobody believes in anymore. I mean, makes sense, right? And that distinction matters. Sokurov was not attacking veterans' children, no. He was pointing out that the government could expand education funding instead of redistributing scarcity. But redistribution is cheaper, and cruelty is easier. Tuition fees of 2, 3, 400,000 rubles per year are simply unattainable for most families, especially outside Moscow. That is $2,500 to $5,000 per year. Might sound like peanuts for the viewers from the US or Canada, but in Russia that is a huge spending. Could be half of families' income or even more in some cases. All that against the backdrop of an economy that officially booms while households quietly suffocate, education becomes a privilege instead of a ladder, and so, guess what? This obviously hit hard because Sokurov is not theorizing. He is a teacher himself. He knows these numbers and he sees students in real life. He sees them as actual people, not just numbers or statistics on paper. He built film schools far from Moscow, places like Nalchik, far from the capital, places where talent exists but opportunity does not. Those schools produce internationally recognized filmmakers, prove that investment works, even in Russia, prove that the country could still function differently. And that is exactly why the Kremlin hates this line of thinking, because it exposes the lie that inequality is natural rather than engineered. It showed that Russia can be a normal country within a year, within a month if it wants. But there is just a bunch of people headed by the most evil of them, all of these who prevents this from happening, because it affects them personally. And that, for the Kremlin inhabitants, is completely unacceptable. The sacrifice of millions is well worth the good life of the chosen few. But schools was not the only topic Sokurov talked about. Even though in Putin's Russia this is already way more than enough to be sent to jail for years, Sokurov continued discussing sensitive topics. Which ones exactly? Let's talk about them in our next chapter. Then came utilities. Heating, water, electricity, the most boring, most Russian topics imaginable. And precisely because of that, they are radioactive. Every winter pipes burst, cities freeze, people die, bills rise when service quality collapses. I mean, everyone knows this, everyone lives it. And everyone is expected to shut up because, there's war going on, I guess, apparently. Well, Sokurov did not stay quiet. He talked about people wondering how they will survive winter bills. He even floated the idea of temporary shelters for those who simply cannot pay anymore. That sounds absurd until you realize it already exists informally. People choosing between heat and food, elderly residents sealing off rooms with industrial foam, families rationing electricity like it is the 1990s again. This is Putin's Achilles heel, not tanks, not missiles, but utilities. Something what hundreds of millions of people are exposed daily. They might not feel the effects of the war directly, so they do not care that much. But when you cannot shower, microwave your dinner or heat your bedroom, that is when you absolutely feel it. Because utilities expose the truth. War does not replace governance, it cannibalizes it. As long as everything can be framed as secondary to the front lines, the president remains untouchable. The moment someone drags everyday misery back into the conversation, the spell breaks. Sokurov reminded him that the country still exists behind the slogans, and that was unforgivable. But guess what? He still kept going. He either realized that he already said too much and there was no point holding back, or for some reason he thought that Putin might actually listen and do something. In one way or another, the confessions continued. Let's see what else was discussed in our next chapter. The core of Sokurov's speech, however, was not economics. It was language, culture, fear. The foreign agent label, a designation so broad, humiliating and so deliberately vague that it turns citizens into suspects overnight by literally anyone's decree. Sokurov did not shout about censorship. He spoke about humiliation, about people watching weekly lists to see who gets branded next, about how this destroys lives quietly, methodically, without trials or explanations. Then he did something truly dangerous. He referenced Soviet cinema. Not to glorify it, but to remind people that even under repression, art once humanized war instead of worshiping it. Old Soviet movie, for example, Ballad of a Soldier, did not portray even Germans as monsters. It portrayed war itself as the enemy. Sokurov pointed out the obvious. That film would be banned today. Its director would be crushed administratively or sent to Gulag in Siberia, and everyone in the room knew he was right. This was not nostalgia, it was a warning. When a state fears nuance, it fears thought. When it fears thought, it fears youth. And when it fears youth, it has already lost its future. Sokurov was not asking for rebellion, he was asking for a dialogue. And tragedy is that even that now sounds radical. Believe it or not, Putin responded. Of course, he always does. With cliches, with whataboutism, with references to the United States, with assurances that this needs to be looked into and no abuse should happen. The only line that went viral was his defense of the foreign agent law, delivered with the usual blend of half-truths and outright lies. But his answer did not matter. The moment has already passed. The real question is not what Putin said, it's what someone finally dared to say to him. In a system where access to power is rationed and weaponized, speaking normally becomes an act of resistance. Just think about it, speaking normally. Sokurov did not demand revolutions. He did not beg for favors. He just reminded millions of Russians that they are not insane for wanting education, heat, dignity and conversation. And judging by the reaction, it worked. People started talking, even the politically disengaged ones. The ones who always say it's not that simple, let's not talk about it, let's talk about something else. For the first time in a long while, what millions think privately was spoken publicly, nationwide, without hysteria. That is precisely why this moment mattered. Not because it changed policy, but because it briefly broke the silence. And in modern Putin's Russia, that alone is a small miracle. Well, there you have it, guys. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel for more just like this. If you wish to support our work, there are links down below. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe